But glad you are with us this morning, Kahila, community, congregation, and for those of you online, glad you are with us. And this morning, I have the Torah portion, which is basically in the book of Numbers from chapter 4 through chapter 7. Just for informational purposes, it happens to be the longest Torah portion out of all the Torah portions. So that means I get to talk a little longer before I have to come down. But it is called the Parashat Nasso, and Nasso means to take a census. And as when you start in chapter 4 of Numbers, it's talking about the families of Aaron, or the sons of Aaron, and the Levites, and what their jobs were regarding the tabernacle. And God had them number each of those families and each of those members of the Levitical tribe in order to give account for them to take care of the various objects and utensils inside the tabernacle. And with that, the chapter 4 and then chapter 7, and I'm skipping a couple because I'll come back to those in a second. Chapter 7 shows all of the tribes and other articles of gold, silver, incense, and other things that they bring into the tabernacle to give to God. So it's like chapter 4 and chapter 7 deal with the tabernacle itself. And they give them carts to carry the holy objects. And the Kohathites, which were sons of Levi, they had the special privilege of taking the articles that were in the Holy of Holies. But rather than placing it on a cart that they had been given, they were instructed to carry these items on their shoulders, which meant the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, the table of showbread. And just as a way of note, Kohathites meant congregation. Now, since they were carrying the menorah, the light, the Ark of the Covenant, and the table of showbread, to me that signifies exactly what we should do, because Kohathite meant congregation. It meant wrinkle or blunt. But I focus more on the congregation side of it, because we as a congregation, or you could say Kohathites, should be doing just that. We should carry the Word of God, the Torah, the Ark of the Covenant on our shoulders as we go out every day from here. And the same thing, the showbread. Should we not feed the flock, just as Peter was instructed by Jesus when they were out by the sea right before he ascended? And then, the light, the menorah. We should be a light to the world, just as Jesus instructed us as well. And to me, there was so much in this Torah portion. Well, I'll say that, not just this Torah portion. Everything in the Old has, to me, something that corresponds to it in the New. That's a shocker, right? The Old Testament is Jesus Christ concealed. The New Testament is Jesus Christ revealed. So it shouldn't be a shocker that we see these things, because the temple was showing the body of Jesus, basically, and showing us and how we now are that tabernacle. We now are that temple. And then now, to get to the chapters that were sandwiched between chapters 4 and 7, chapter 5 and 6, they dealt with, I found it kind of odd because it jumps from tabernacle to these two chapters and then back to tabernacle. But he was talking about those that were defiled with leprosy, those that were defiled by sin, that, that came in the beginning of chapter 5. And then he went into what is termed by many the law of jealousy. If a husband was jealous of his wife, whether legitimately or not legitimately, there was a prescribed procedure to go before the priest in order to test her for faithfulness or unfaithfulness. And so that, to me, was descriptive of what happens to us and what happened to Israel. Israel and Judah were unfaithful. She was an unfaithful bride, and he tested her when he had this jealousy. And if you were wondering, he later wound up divorcing Israel and Judah. So in many churches, God himself could not be a pastor because he was divorced. And yet, here was his instructions for unfaithful wives in here. And then in chapter 6 was the Nazirite vow. And this was for males or females, and this was those that desired to yield themselves completely to God. Yet shouldn't that be all of us every day? We should be Nazirites, devoted to God completely. And by the definition, the Hebrew word Nazir, from which Nazirite is derived, means to be separated or consecrated. I digress. Shouldn't we all be that way every day? The Nazirite vow had 5 features to it. The first, as I mentioned earlier, is for both men and women, and they could participate in this vow. And many times the vow was done for purely personal reasons, for Thanksgiving, for being healed, or from having a child, things of that nature. And the third was it had a specific time frame that depended on what you were consecrating yourself for or dedicating yourself to for that time. And then there were guidelines and restrictions involved with that. You were abstained from wine, fermented drink, grape juice, grapes, raisins, not even the seeds or the skins. And then for the time that they were in this vow, they were not to cut their hair and or go near a dead body, even if it was a family member. We should consecrate ourselves the same way and not go, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But finally, there was, as number 5, was a sacrificial procedure to follow to complete the vow, and upon doing that, then the vow was completed. There were several in the Old Testament, one in the New, that did the Nazirite vow. And just to eliminate confusion, Nazirite is not the same as Netzer or Nazarene. Many have questioned that. I'm not going into that this morning to share all that, but just for your information, it is not the same. But a comparison to the Nazirite and how we should do ourselves, Romans 12, 1 through 2, Paul says, I urge you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. We set ourselves apart as a Nazirite in so doing. For the Nazirite vow symbolizes the need for us to be separate from worldly ways and be a holy people, consecrated to God and set aside. And finally, after the sacrifices of the Nazirite were concluded, in the chapter 6 comes a blessing that most of us probably know, have heard, stated, or anything else, but it is what's termed the Aaronic blessing. May Adonai bless you and keep you. And I'm speaking this to you even now. May Adonai make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Adonai turn his face toward you and grant you shalom. And in this way, they, meaning God's people, place my name over B'nai Israel, and so I will bless them.